Hi guys, welcome to another episode of the world famous podcast, Beating the Press, with your two hosts, myself, Ty. Obviously, got the brilliant Kristian with us as well. Thanks for joining us. We talk about football. That's pretty much all we talk about. We are currently in the midst of looking back at previous World Cups in the lead up to this year's World Cup at Qatar. We have reached 2018, the World Cup at Russia. Oh, how that would be looking this year if the World Cup would not have been held in Russia if it was if it was now. But how time has changed and how things have changed. But yeah, so this is the last World Cup we're looking at, and then obviously we'll be moving on to a preview show as well, looking at 2022. So Chris, how are you? Let's kick it off. Let's just make sure we're okay before we start talking about football. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well. I'm very excited, obviously, for the World Cup coming up because, usually Liverpool are keeping me happy these days, and they're not. So my allegiances are now with England. I started even checking in with the England cricket team, and that shows where we're at the moment. So I'm good. I'm looking forward to this World Cup. Obviously, with the last few podcasts, it's been getting us really in the mood for it. So I've got the World Cup, as I mentioned in the last one. I'm going to New York, so I'll be able to watch a few games while I'm out there, particularly the England-USA game. So there's a lot to look forward to. What about yourself?
Yeah, I've been all right. I think you saw the YouTube video from the FA that was sent out.
Yeah, you're famous again.
And I was like, yeah, and I tried to get, so the guy when he was interviewing me, I tried to say to him, I said, oh, by the way, I do a podcast, you should try some, and I tried to drop a hint, subscribe. He wasn't having any of it at all. And then the worst thing is, and it's just been, so I've shared it with friends and family, and my sister's come back to me, she said, oh, it's absolutely brilliant. They fucked your name up. And I didn't realise, so my second name is Akram, but they spell it Akrim. And I'm just saying to myself, I was like, come on, can we get that changed? Maybe make, you're the FA. It's not like me editing it and I've got one of our names out. They've got like a professional company and you can't get a name right. So, yeah.
So for those that don't know, it was obviously some kind of inclusion.
No, it wasn't. No. So it was one of my roles, apart from a full-time job, is I'm a tutor for the FA. So they call it the coach developer. So I deliver the UEFA license. They had a film crew when I was delivering. We got told sort of day before. Then I had to have a haircut and a shave. Just didn't want to look like a hobo. I didn't know how far or wide the reach was going to be. Anyway, they interviewed us about the course, what it was, what it entailed, and just to give people an idea if they were looking to book onto the course. So it was just that. I mean, it was. I probably spoke for about 20 minutes, but they clipped it all down to about a minute and a half, 2 minutes. Which is, I'd imagine they're trying to get the best bits out. But yeah, so that's what it was, and obviously, I didn't even know they were releasing it, but one of the other tutors dropped it, and I shared it. But my sister came back; she was brilliant, but they spelled your name wrong, and I didn't even realise. I didn't look. But it's
really good. We're going to have to put it in the link. We're going to have to put it in the description box so people can.
I'll leave it for you to put it in there because you do the you put it on YouTube. Anyway, right, we are on a tight budget because we're skint and we're using Zoom's 40 minutes. We don't want to be rambling on about my escapades, so we'll just move on. So, 2018, I'm not going to talk too much at this one because Italy didn't qualify.
Yes.
It's getting a bit of a habit, so I'm not going to. And it was England's best ever tournament since 1966, I believe. I think they got it, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm gonna actually start. That's where we're gonna actually start the podcast with Italy. But just a few things. Obviously, if you haven't been here before, we obviously done a load of these up until the World Cup. We started off on Italia 1990. So that's 28 years worth of footage, 7 World Cups, I want to say. So that's 7 podcasts that you can check out. I'll put the link up there somewhere. And obviously, this is the 8th and final one for now. We'll obviously continue this. Hopefully, we'll be around for the next World Cup. Now, obviously, this World Cup was held in Russia, and apparently it was the first time held in Eastern Europe. That's what I'm reading off my screen. Just a little bit of information. What's a World Cup without a bit of controversy? There was all the racism and LGBTQ, all the human rights issues and all that. So the usual that goes on in a World Cup. So it was a bit of a worrisome time. England were involved in, I think, the bidding process, and we just got pretty much pied off. And yeah, so a couple of facts from that particular World Cup. It was £14.2 billion was spent, and that's the most expensive World Cup to date. And it was the introduction of VAR, the first in a World Cup. Iceland and Panama made their first appearances, and notably the two teams that failed to qualify, 4 times champions, Italy and the Netherlands. So obviously that's where we're going to start. We're going to start with Ty, because obviously he's an Italy fan. It seems to be like a regular occurrence. Either Italy really go far in a tournament and win it, or just don't qualify at all. What happened with this one?
You've pretty much nailed it, and it's a similar. Again, we've not qualified for this one as well. And if you go back to 2006, when we'd obviously actually won it, and then the following tournament we didn't qualify from 2010. Same again in 2014, which obviously we had with England, and Italy both didn't qualify. And Italy thought, you know what, we're sick of getting knocked out in group stages. We're not even going to qualify. So that's where they got to, and obviously, yeah. I mean, it was just if you're going to ask me if you're asking me why they didn't qualify, who they didn't qualify, without looking at how my memory's gone, because at the moment I'm thinking how they didn't qualify 2022, and it comes down to Jorginho missing a couple of penalties against Switzerland, late on, and that's all it is. And it was really fine margins. But yeah, so that wasn't, so obviously Italy didn't qualify. Now, I'll always want England to do well, but the tournament for me, it was the first time I felt that the country was united behind England, and I think a lot of that was to do with the work Southgate had done.
Because he had it was his first tournament, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then there was obviously all the songs that came out, and then all the stuff, in the beer garden with people throwing the beers, and that was something to be like every sort of ITV news at 10 or news at 6 or whatever. That was the sort of starting shot, wasn't it? Oh, beers in England have qualified again, England have won, or England have done something, and it was a real good feel good factor around the country, and that's what sport does and football does. And I just think sometimes, that gets overlooked, even though it was just for 3 or 4 weeks. It was really good place to be, because there was that real good feeling. And then obviously, when they got knocked out, but just to build up. And I felt it was, for me, without having an Italy hat on or worrying about Italy and just sort of focusing on England, I remember that time. I thought, this is what this country could be if there was no division, which unfortunately there is, you know what I mean? And I felt there was, because you watched a lot of, we spoke about this when it was just sort of after 2018 as well, when the pandemic hit, and we started our podcast. And one of the things we spoke about was, I remember this podcast, we spoke about how, so a lot of the sort of South Asian contingent, whenever World Cup was on, because they never sort of felt English, or they got shit from, and sort of talking more sorry for the NF and that sort of stuff, and all that sort of actual real racism, which you don't see as much, you probably see it more on social media. There was that, it sort of stopped you supporting England. So everyone always sort of, to the people that I grew up around, they always seem to attach themselves sort of with Argentina, Brazil, Germany, Holland, anyone else. But England, this was the first World Cup that I remember. Whenever there was, and I went in, everyone sort of supported England. Yeah. It was the first time I felt it, and I saw it. And people were genuinely gutted when England went out, and they were genuinely happy when they won as well. And you had people that wouldn't normally be involved in football actually getting behind England as well. That's my sort of, I've probably completely not answered your question, but that's just sort of my memory of that tournament. And I remember it being really, obviously the other bit that I've got to add on as well is the bit around Russia and the similarities between Russia and Qatar. And I don't feel Qatar are getting slated now for their LGBTQ rights and the human rights and all that sort of stuff. Russia are obviously shown now they're no angels, and if memory serves me right, I don't think Russia got half as much as shit as Qatar are getting. Don't get me wrong; they're both not neither of them are perfect, and Russia have obviously shown that more than anything.
Yeah,
their gay rights and LGBTQ rights, they're quite bad as well. But it's sort of easy just sort of sitting here, and I think it was easier to have a go at Qatar. Because they don't have a Vladimir Putin, because you're having to go at him, that's going to bounce back somewhere down the line. So it's a bit easier to go at Qatar. Whether it's racism, it's a bit easier to do it them, or whether it's the leader, they don't have a stand-up leader like Putin. I don't know, but it just feels to me at the moment it's slightly different and a bit biased and a bit. It's a lot more oomph to this sort of scrutiny that Qatar are getting and the criticism that they're getting. And I think Russia got away with a lot.
Yeah, they did, and obviously we've seen where they went to now. You know what I mean? Yeah. So yeah. Like going back to what you were saying about England, like around the country, it was brilliant because, like you said, anyone and everyone would essentially watch the games. You'd go in and you'd going to work, and that's all anyone ever spoke about. And the more that we went on in the competition, the further you went on, the more and more it was getting hyped, and you just think about what would have happened if we actually won it. But that's neither here or there. But what I remember I don't actually remember this. I had to go through the goals like we normally do. I'm presuming you do the same. You watch all the goals before you come on the podcast just to give you that refresher. And I was watching the goals and I thought, I got to the end of it and I was like, I've got to check something out here. And I went back and I looked at every single England goal, and it was almost like an England set-piece World Cup team.
Yeah.
Out of 12 goals that we scored, 9 of them goals were from either a corner, a penalty, a direct free kick, or some kind of routine where they'd score within about 5 seconds of, like, let's say the corner being taken, like a little routine.
Yeah.
And like one of those goals one of the open play goals actually got smashed off Harry Kane's heel and went into the goal. So effectively, like, there was 2 goals scored in open play. So it just makes me believe, when he thinks about picking this team in particular, the likes of Harry and Maguire, we're playing to our strengths, but that's for another podcast. But
that's the just reminding me of that the World Cup. It was a love train, wasn't it? When he did a different way of corners where they'd all stand in line behind each other and then they attack it. Well, set pieces are a big part of tournament knockout football, and then obviously, I do remember a lot of the goals, and there were a lot of set piece goals. But if you look at previous winners, you know what I mean. It's the set pieces are a huge part of the game. I think England have always had an issue. I mean, England are not going to be Spain. They're not going to be Italy. That's not the way they play. Do you know what I mean? They're not going to open teams up with, they're a counter-attacking team who thrive on set pieces. That's the way Southgate set them up to whatever formation. It's 3-4-3, 3-5-2, 4-3-3, whatever it is. It'll be that's basically the principles that he'll adhere to. And it's obviously got him success both at the World Cup and the Euros as well. So it'll be, and I can't imagine him changing too much for this one coming along here.
Well, that's what you generally find, isn't it? Like, you think of all the best games with the best teams. Let's say you put up a Brazil versus a France. It very rarely comes down to the absolute genius of a player or a brilliant performance. It comes down to the set pieces, the finer details. You think of the France-Brazil final, Zidane, it was 2 headers. It wasn't like Zidane jinking in and out, or Ronaldo shooting from 30 yards or anything like that. If you think of this World Cup, the semi-final, I think it was Umtiti scored in the semi-final against Belgium, I think it was, and that was the winning goal in that. And you're thinking, like, 2 teams that play beautiful football. So, World Cups are won obviously in tight margins. There's no room for mistakes. So that's maybe why we tended to do well in the last one, because we were so good in set pieces. But going to our particular group, obviously we had in our group Belgium, Tunisia, and Panama. And we seemed to struggle. We definitely struggled against Tunisia because we needed like a last-minute goal. Obviously, Panama were the whipping boys of the group, but Belgium, just your thoughts while we're here on Belgium's tournament. Obviously, they were the golden generation. They're moving into probably the latter end of that golden generation. Your thoughts on their tournament as a whole, because they obviously made it all the way to the semi-final.
Yeah, I thought Belgium. I mean, I know a lot of the time we look at the draw and it opened up and how Belgium did really well. Do you know what I mean? The team, they obviously knocked out Brazil and they got France, and I just felt that Belgium, France, you always felt whoever won that semi-final would win it. And that round, that part of the draw, they had a really favourite, as the teams got knocked out. I want to say a favourable side of the draw. They obviously got a tougher side, but they had a really good side, and that was the one where I thought, if they don't win it this one, they'll never win it. So that golden generation gone, and that's the one they probably missed out. And I think it worked out about right. And I think if they were on the England side, playing England or Croatia, they'd have probably gone through and got to the final. But they obviously Hazard was, he was on fire. They brought, the players. But I just felt that was the one for them to do it. Football's a lot of time. It's about moments, and if you don't grasp them in those really tight moments, because the France game, I remember, was really tight and they lost that 1-0. And it was one of those, if they won that, you'd expect, they'd have probably gone on to win it. England again, you look at the semi-final 1-0, you've got to, those are big moments, you know what I mean? And you've got to see it out, and they didn't, and then that's what happens. But for Belgium, I thought they were really good, but when it gets to the semi-final, it's really tight. And my thought process at the time was exactly what it is now, looking back at the sort of the route to the final. There was whoever won that side of the semi-final would win it, and that's how it panned out.
Yeah. So the other groups, I'll just quickly run through the teams that qualified. You had Uruguay and Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt barely laid a glove on any of them. And then we got Spain and Portugal. Do you remember the game between Spain and Portugal?
No, I don't. You're going to remind me though, aren't you?
Yeah, that was the Cristiano Ronaldo game.
Was that the hat-trick one?
He banged in a hat-trick in a World
Cup game.
Yeah,
I do know, yeah.
Yeah, it was almost single-handedly took it to them. And obviously, I think this was the timeline, Portugal will have been the European champions at the time.
Yeah, 2016, yeah.
Yeah, so they'll have obviously had high hopes. I think they did. Obviously, they went into the knockout stages, and we'll discuss that shortly. France and Denmark went through. Croatia and Argentina seemed to top a tough group with Nigeria and Iceland. It was quite a tasty group. Brazil and Switzerland tend to go through. They seem to always manage to meet each other in tournaments. Serbia and Costa Rica knocked out. Feel free to jump in if you see anything notable from any of these groups.
No,
Sweden,
nothing.
Yeah, Sweden, Mexico. I think there's one in this one though. So you've got a group of Sweden, Mexico, South Korea, and Germany, and that's in fact where we finished. And obviously,
Germany didn't qualify, did they?
Yeah, we've noticed a trend throughout these World Cups where the previous winners, obviously Germany, absolutely obliterated Brazil in the previous tournament, and then went on to win the tournament and then finished bottom of that group.
That's it. Do you know something? So everyone, have a bet on France not qualifying from the World Cup group, because there's a trend. And France have got a lot of injuries at the moment as well, so that'd be an absolute, you know what I mean? It's just,
That's Ty's tip.
That's mine, yeah, without any research or anything, and just going past the history. But yeah, no, it's very, we spoke about it in the last podcast. Previous winners just tend to really struggle, and they don't get out of the group stages, and that's historical as well, and it goes back quite a bit. But my focus is sort of like looking at on the knockout stages and West. So we've got some really top games. I mean, the one that sort of sticks out for me is the France-Argentina game. I don't know if you remember it. I mean, we'll obviously look at England's knockout stage, and obviously there were some really big moments there. But France won that game 4-3. I don't know if you remember much of that game.
I do-ish. I remember France taking a bit of a lead. I think they took maybe like a 3-1 or a 4-2, and then it was kind of, but it was always a close game between. Yeah, So I remember a Di Maria goal, top corner.
Yeah,
that was about it.
So I mean, I think Griezmann scored and Di Maria equalised, and then the second half it ended up going. So Argentina took the lead, 2-1, and then it just went 4-1. It went Pavard, Mbappe, and then Aguero scored really, really late on. But I suppose the game. I remember watching the game, and France were comfortably the better side. But like scorelines sometimes give you like a bit of a flattering look, and that was one of those games where it was just like. Never been a one goal. Argentina, France were comfortably the better side. We talk about teams sort of running their cycle. I felt that Argentina team, their time to win it was that 2014 one when they lost to Germany, and it didn't quite pan out. And I think similar to and I think that's probably where they just sort of finished and gone. But I think we need to sort of focus on the England one and what you remember the Colombia game, because the England knockout games to me I can remember them like clearly. So I'll go with your version first, that Colombia, because I felt that was, from all the games, I felt that was the biggest one and the biggest psychological hurdle to overcome because of the way they overcame it as well and some of the knockouts. But you go first.
Yeah, so I remember watching this at Fan Park in Middlesbrough. Basically, we had a massive screen. And I had all my mates that came around, all the local mates, and we decided to go there early. Atmosphere was absolutely bouncing. It was building up before the game, and you just couldn't hear yourself because there was that many people around. It must have been like felt like thousands, but it was probably like a few hundred. And everybody was just a jolly up. I think it was around about 3, maybe 4. I want to say it was getting later in the afternoon when we were watching it, and I can't remember how we took the lead. Was it something like maybe a Trippier goal or something like that? It'll have been a set piece. Anyway, it was a set piece. We scored, and I remember, and you mentioned it earlier, and I fucking hate it. I hate it. Everybody throwing up their drinks, and I was absolutely drenched in pints of lager. There was just flings flying everywhere, but it was an absolutely brilliant moment, but absolutely drenched. And then obviously, was it Yerry Mina?
Yerry Mina. So Harry, sorry, just to let me jump in there. So Harry Kane scored the penalty, to give England the lead.
Yeah.
And then Yerry Mina.
From what I remember, it was a very late goal, the Yerry Mina goal.
And if you remember the Yerry Mina goal as well, Pickford pulled off an absolute worldie of a save. That was flying top corner. He tipped that from that corner. That's when they scored. And Yerry Mina is like about 6'8". Anyway, so they scored that. But then,
and I think it went into, from what I remember, it went into extra time, and we weren't the better team. Almost as if Colombia were pushing on, and almost like they were the better team. We kind of held on, and then obviously took it to the penalty shootout. And we had never won a World Cup, never won a penalty shootout in the World Cup up until that point. And just remember, obviously going through the team, not feeling too optimistic, but as soon as Pickford pulls off a couple of saves, you start getting a bit optimistic, and then Eric Dyer, steps up and he takes that penalty, and obviously slots it in easily. And then that again, when I got absolutely drenched, I was hugging people that I'd never ever met before. We were literally running around like little kids with airplanes and everything like that, just hugging everybody. It was
amazing. It's interesting what you remember from that game, and I remember that game, and when Colombia scored, I thought, they'd gone here. Just because England, because you could feel the players, it was almost there, they were through. And the other thing that really stuck out for me for that game was it felt like an away game, because there were so many more Colombian fans than England fans. And then Harry Kane, and then you're right, that's the extra time was all Colombia. But I watched that game and I thought Harry Kane that was one of the best performances I'd seen from him. And the reason being, every time the ball went up to him, he held on to it. You were getting free kicks. He was playing such a smart game. And he, as I'm obviously playing defender, I'm being a centre half pretty much all my life. And when you're playing in defence and you're under the cosh and the ball goes up to your centre forward, you want him to buy you those seconds. Do you know what I mean? Just to give you a breather, to get you out. And he must have won so many. He must have had 10 free kicks, I think, in that. Just unbelievable, great hold-up play. The referee was on it, and it felt like a real tough away game. And then when it went to penalties, it almost felt like England were playing, but then it still felt like Colombia going to go through. And you just felt if England could overcome this psychological barrier, they could win it. It was mad. It's like you could win it. And then the fact when they won it, and the memory that I got from that is Gareth Southgate just sort of looking up in the picture when he's looking up and he's got his waistcoat on and he's like, it's just release of absolute ecstasy and sheer relief of getting over that line. And that was when he felt. And the Sweden game, then we'll talk about it in a bit, but that's what I felt was the biggest hurdle for them to get through, just because of the, thinking you through, not getting through, having to put through that extra time and all that sort of stuff. So there was a lot to get through. But I thought, absolutely brilliant. And then when they got over that, then obviously moved on to the Sweden game as well. You can keep us off on that.
Yeah, so the Sweden game, I don't really remember a great deal about it. I think it was I remember Dele Alli scoring in the game. I can't remember who the other one was.
Harry Maguire scored. It was a Harry Maguire scored from a set piece, wasn't it? And I remember the game. And for me, that game was I know it was only 2-0, but it was a really comfortable 2-0. Yeah, it never felt like, because normally Sweden are always like a really tough team to play against. They're always a bogey team, and they'll get something. But I just felt that game watching it, England just comfortably, it was 1-0, even out, 1-0. The second goal was always going to come. In the second game, they just played it out, and it was almost a case of like, let's rest players, because we're not in any threat here. But it's mad to think that Dele Alli played in that World Cup, and now he's just fallen off an absolute cliff.
Well, I've just looked at the teams there, and you've got Dele Alli and you've got Lingard as well. So it's kind of weird that both of them two
They're playing for Besiktas and Nottingham Forest, respectively.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, like, you know, a lot spoken about the English draw along the way, and obviously it did help. But and it's almost like a curse in that, you know, once you come across a good side, you know, you haven't had that yardstick to measure how good you actually are.
Yeah.
And obviously, once we came across Croatia, who I think didn't they play? Was it Denmark or someone else? And they had a couple of penalty shootouts along the way, so it was kind of fortune that got them there. But
so yeah, Croatia just about beat Russia as well. Do you remember if that was on a penalty shootout as well? So they, you know, that, and obviously Russia were the home side as well. And again, they beat Denmark on penalties as well. So they had a bit of luck going through. But Croatia were thinking exactly the same as England, to think, you know, if we can get through this, we've got a great chance of winning it. And well, yeah, we'll just move on to the Croatia game. What's your memories of that?
My memories were a lot. Again, we went to the same fan park, and
Superstition.
Superstition. That's exactly what it was. And a lot of my friends had an overwhelming sense of optimism, and me, I am very, very much a pessimist when it comes to England. And I just remember them thinking that it was going to be quite a cakewalk. But, you know, you look at the quality in their team. You know, I'm looking at it here: Perisic, Modric, Rebic, Mandzukic, Brozovic, Rakitic. You know, they're ridiculously good players. And you know, we didn't have the best team, but we had a really functional team. And I always felt like, you know, quality would tell. So again, although I was optimistic, you know, that we could potentially win it, I always felt like that they were going to be favourites. But when we obviously scored the goal early on, I thought that was it. Right, now let's kick on, go for the throat. But as England tend to do, we almost sat back almost immediately, and that was our undoing. We scored way too early, and then they just took over the game from there. What about yourself?
Yeah, I remember the Trippier goal. It was a hell of a free kick, and I'd actually backed Croatia to win it or to get to the final anyway. As I worked, you know, when I was I thought they had a really good. And you know, we talk about time, and I thought if this Croatian team doesn't do really well in this tournament or win it, they'll never do, because they had a bit of a golden generation as well.
Yeah.
And they've got through, and they played England. And I remember the game. It was just, it felt like England, once they got the one, they thought they'd done the job. It was like you could feel it almost like watching it, you could feel the players had the weight of the nation on them. And they were like, oh, we scored, and there was that release. And thinking, thank God we've done it now. You know what I mean?
You know what? It was very, very similar to the Italy game in the
yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm not there, and I'm in the stadium watching, supporting Italy. But that, yeah, you're right. It probably did feel, because I think they scored too early, and then the away team, the other teams obviously got a lot of time on the ball and a lot of time to get back in the game. And watching that game, I remember when Tippy, it just felt like it wasn't like Croatia suddenly swung momentum. It was like really slow process, slow, and then once they've got it, and then it's like, no, do you know what I mean? And it was just this really, really tough one, and he sort of knew where it was going. And the worrying thing for me, I mean, just sort of looking ahead, is when sort of Croatia scored the Mandzukic's goal, and that gave them the lead next to time, you never felt England were coming back, and it was just like, nah, they're dead, they're done now. Do you know what I mean? And that is it. And then obviously it's just sort of moved on from there. Anything else in that semi-final for you before we move on to the final?
No, I just felt like if we could get to penalties, that was the biggest thing for me. But the key thing that you just said there is, once we went behind, never once did we even look. Did I feel like we were actually going to get back into it? And that was the unfortunate thing.
So the final itself, my memory is obviously France won it. They beat Croatia, and they were the better side comfortably. What I remember from it was Hugo Lloris throwing an absolute clangering.
Yes.
Do you remember it?
He tried to take someone on, didn't he?
He's like, what are you doing? What are you doing here? Come on, Croatia, we're back in game here.
Yeah. I remember like Mbappe. You know, this was his tournament. You know, where, like, really to announce himself. This is, you know, the one coming up is the one where, you know, he's beginning to get into his prime. But he kind of took it by storm. But it was a very entertaining final from what I remember. It was quite competitive right up until I want to say around about the hour mark. And obviously then France ran away with it. And then I think they might have got a consolation goal later on in the game. But yeah, it almost felt like France were, the key players were at a good age. I'm looking at the team there. So it's Kante, Pogba, Mbappe, Griezmann, Matuidi, and Giroud. Not outstanding, not by we said this on the last couple of podcasts. By all, they're not the best team ever to win it. You know what I mean? They're kind of, I don't want to say best of a bad bunch because that's just disservice, but you know what I mean.
No, I know. I totally know what you mean. I just think looking back at that as well, you think of some of the players that have. I mean, the bit that Pogba obviously was brilliant in that tournament. It was how did you play that for Man United? And I think that Pogba one is obviously on social media. That team talk he gave in the final as well. And it's like, well, why doesn't he do that for that? It's probably because he hasn't got that same responsibility and he's got Solskjaer and all these other players. But just looking back, I'm just going through some of the sort of teams, the players that tournament. So you got Hazard, Griezmann, Mbappe, Perisic. Do you know what I mean? Some really N'Golo and Kante, some real top players in there.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember the previous World Cup. The young player of the tournament was
Thomas Muller.
Pogba.
Okay.
So he went on to do well. So by all that means, then it should maybe be Mbappe because Mbappe was the young player of the tournament on this particular one.
Did Luka Modric win player of the tournament?
Luka Modric won
because I backed him to win player of the tournament. So I remember years ago when they played Spain in that final, they lost 400 Euros, and I backed Pirlo to get player of the tournament. It was like 80-1. It was only like daft 5 at 80-1. I like the final 400 quid. Got the final, he was favourite to win it. Spain beat him 4-0 and ended up being Iniesta. I'm like, how the fuck's that happened? So sometimes you see something and you're thinking, who's priced out? Do they know this guy's like, it's like absolutely different gravy? But that's how it worked out. And
just to do a bit of
my tip for everyone is just back France not to qualify for the group stages.
I've got to put it on now that you've said it. But just to do a bit of housekeeping, Harry Kane was top goal scorer with 6 goals. About 5 of them were probably penalties. So no, good tournament by England. Obviously, it set us up nicely for the Euros, which obviously, we'll be looking into the Euros on our next build-up after this tournament. We're going way ahead of ourselves. But as always, before the end of the podcast, we're just going to ask Ty for his question of the day.
Yeah, so question of the day today, it's obviously linked to England and it's for England fans. I'm hoping most of our subscribers, viewers, listeners are England fans. So it's obviously England were brilliant in that one. My question is, at what point in that World Cup did you believe England could win it? Whether it was a Colombia game or Sweden, what stage for you guys did you think England could win it? Let us know, comments down below, and always we will respond and get back to you.
Brilliant. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. 7. Now, this is the 8th podcast where we've done the World Cup. You've enjoyed yourself?
Absolutely brilliant. It's great looking back. I always enjoy it looking back because obviously you've got to Google a little bit because just to sort of refresh your memory. But it's really good to just sort of look back and think, I remember that. He was a great player, wasn't he? Do you know what I mean? Just looking back and
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to covering a couple of subjects over the next week or so, which we will be doing. So tune in, check out all the previous podcasts, and we'll see you on the next one.
See you guys. Bye.